So, our afternoon breakout speakers, Dr. Reed, Dr. Satoshi, of course, Lance for the second time, Dr. Clayton. Let's compress and be nice and cozy here. Should have got a written question for you. Just on because I think we got a feedback that some who are understandably not very good at English are a bit shy. So we encourage you to either write your question in Nihongo or in Mandarin, and then we'll have our translators announce it as a question, or you can still verbally speak your question again in Nihongo or in Mandarin, and we'll have our translator feedback us in English. So don't be shy, whether you're English proficient or not. We're all aiming for knowledge sharing here. Okay? Now, talking about that, I got, and I'm raising now the actual paper that was passed on to me just after one of the breakout sessions. And this is for Dr. Satoshi. Right? Now, apparently, they want to, in their farm, of course, they're getting ingredients for food, people food, such as chicken, vegetables, eggs, and they want to disinfect them pretty much before entering the farm. Correct. These are food for people working in the farm. Do you have any suggestions on how they can decontaminate the food?
Why don't you just cook them? Then maybe make it even more delicious.
So in that case, bringing them in raw and then cooking them, that would solve the problem.
That was part of the joke, actually.
Okay.
It wasn't funny. But,
Sorry.
I think, so I don't know if he or she is talking about lunch like a complete meal or ingredient.
Correct. I think this is like your lunch ration during lunchtime in the farm.
So it's complete meal.
Correct.
So it's cooked already.
They're bringing in raw food from the market and then bringing it in the farm to cook it in the farm.
Oh, okay. I don't know, probably maybe Clayton may have some experience on China because we usually don't do that in Japan.
Yeah.
So well, maybe easiest answer.
Which is also, again, another way, is don't bring in food in the farm.
Yeah, easiest answer to tell you is that don't do it. And no raw material whatsoever to be in that.
That's a good precaution.
To make it 100% safe.
Okay.
Yeah.
But anyone in the group who has experience in cooking inside the farm? Or
Yeah,
raw material?
In my experience, moving the kitchen to the outside part of the farm has been successful. And just as Dr. Satoshi said, cook the food on the dirty side of the farm, and then the cooked food is what is passed into the farm. So the heat treatment that results with the cooking certainly does disinfect it. The other thing I would throw out is hydrogen peroxide is a very safe disinfectant if you must bring in raw materials. And in the food safety world, so for like human kitchens, they use hydrogen peroxide, which degrades into water. So certainly very safe for people to consume.
So either keep your food, eat outside, don't bring in food, or some practical tips as well, the use of hydrogen peroxide as chemical decontaminant. Any questions from the audience? Yep.
It's quite long. Because it's quite rare that we do get this selection and in one house, not all the global experts. So I would like to direct this question to everyone. I am a weekend farmer, okay? That's why I do rely on the inputs that I get from my team and from my veterinary consultant. Okay? My farm is doing quite well. I'm quite happy with the results that I'm getting. There's just one problem with me. I am a price-driven businessman. Okay? And I do this because I do get a lot of inputs from the competition who offer me a lot of cheaper options. No? So I'm very much attracted with that. But after listening to today's session, I realized I was wrong. No? So now my question is, what are your final thoughts or words that will resonate with me to compel me to try and use a premium-priced vaccination program, and that vaccine cost should not always drive my decisions?
That's a deep question. You want to take that?
See if this is working. I need to use that. Oh, there we go. Okay. I would say the first step that you need to do is move away from that price, to move from that price focus to a profit focus is to look at not just the cost, but as I said in my presentation, the economic cost. So how would an inferior product, whether it's a vaccine, a feed, whatever it may be, how would a cheaper product potentially have a negative impact on production performance? And that can be something that you can consult with research, relevant experts, a nutritionist, veterinarian, whoever it may be, to get a sense for, okay, what kind of negative impacts will I have? And then from there, it becomes a fairly simple math problem to look at. So if my average daily gain goes down by this much, feed efficiency changes by this much, what will the total impact be on profit? And so then if that total impact on profit is higher than the savings you got from the cheaper product, then you know it really wasn't a cheaper product at the end of the day, because it had a larger negative impact on profit. So I would say, while it's good to be price sensitive, it keeps us sharp, helps us avoid waste. That focus on profit will really help keep you from going too far in any wrong direction.
Anybody else?
Difficult to add to that,
Yeah.
but one thing that I find powerful is to just present to that farmer the cost of production, and just saying how much money per pig you need to spend to raise that pig to slaughter, and then you realize that the cost of vaccines and medicines is really a very minor part of that. And the risk that you're taking by trying to save a little bit on this low cost can hurt that very large feed cost, for example.
I would throw in, it's okay to ask anybody who's trying to sell you something for data about what's going to happen. And if they can't produce something that compares the current whatever you are buying, right? The high quality, the high cost one. If they can't produce something that can demonstrate the comparison in performance results between the two, good research, just like Oliver is saying, it's too big of a risk. You are putting the entire operation at risk for tiny savings at the end of the day.
Word to the wise. Very good. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have two questions. One is for PRRS. Dr. Daniel, you mentioned that there's like both horizontal and vertical infection. So if the horizontal infection is possible, should the suckling pigs also get vaccinated to ensure that the pigs are healthier? That's my first question. The second question is for PCV. In China, a lot of the customers or our competitors are saying that PCV3 is a really serious threat, and we are still trying to figure out whether this is true or it's just a myth or it's just a rumor. And some of our competitors are even customizing vaccines, not very legally, to say that they can address PCV3. So I just want to get your thoughts from Dr. Otoshi on, I mean, what are we doing on PCV3? Is it something that we should address? What should we do? Yeah, 2 questions.
So one for PRRS and one for PCV2.
Well, on the vaccination for PRRS, we focused here, it is true, on the breeding herd. So we focus on getting those piglets as wild type negative as possible. Once they are weaned out of the farm, I think the vaccination decision is going to depend to where those pigs are going. If they are negative for wild type and being raised in an area that's isolated, you may decide not to vaccinate those pigs. However, if they are raised in regions that are where they are likely going to be exposed, then you certainly want to vaccinate pigs. In Iowa, which is where we live and interact with people, we know from different studies with different populations, different producers, that the chances of those pigs coming from stable farms get exposed to wild type virus during growth phase is close to 100%, Reed. It's close to 100%. It's just a few batches that never see the virus. So in that area, it will be difficult to find producers not vaccinating the growing pigs. They all vaccinate the growing pigs. So that will be the comment. A quick comment on the PCV3 at Iowa State and in Minnesota, South Dakota, Kansas, in Ohio and Purdue. These labs consolidate their findings and report in an aggregated format for different pathogens. One of them is PCV, and a lot of those labs are running PCV2 and 3 in a multiplex, this duplex that detects both viruses. And what I can add is PCV3 is really prevalent, detected, right? It's really common to find PCV3 in those samples being submitted for testing, as much as it is common to find PCV2. So from what we are seeing, PCV3 is also not rare to find. It does not mean that's causing disease. So now, is it causing disease? Now that's a herd-specific question that I'm sure that Satoshi will help us understand.
No, not too much to add what Daniel just explained. As far as we understand, so PCV3, we do not have any cross protection, right, against the current vaccine. If it's PCV2, from A to B or D or whatever, as long as it's PCV2, then yes, we have a cross protection with the all commercial vaccines that are available. But as far as we understand, when it comes to PCV3, then we do not expect that we have a great degree of cross protection. I think the data are available to see that.
But PCV3 is a different virus, really, genetically, and particularly the capsid is very, very different between PCV2 and PCV3. So you may expect a clinical benefit if you have co-infections, which is, again, from Iowa State data, very, very common, particularly in reproductive cases. So when you see very high quantities of PCV3, often those are pigs with PRRS or sows with PRRS and PCV2. So if you control those 2 viruses, you may see PCV3 clinical disease disappear if you have it. So that could be a way of maybe hiding or confusing people, but certainly there's no data to support cross-protection with any of the PCV2 vaccines.
It's part of your differential, right? We're seeing reproductive losses, or you're seeing PCV2-like disease in the field, and it's not PCV2. Investigate PCV3.
I think if you have mummified fetuses, it would be a pathogen that I would have on my list of differentials, right? Probably not highest on the list, PRRS, Parvo, PCV2, and then maybe PCV3, but it's worth considering, especially if the others are not there. And there are some cases reported in the literature, but the frequency seems very low from what I've seen. Maybe Clayton, you can comment, but we've talked about this before.
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of what's been said. I thought Satoshi made a great statement in his Mythbusters that PCV2 viremia does not equal PCVAD. And I would say that is a huge distinction to make with any of your colleagues, is that PCV3 viremia in growing pigs does not mean we have PCV3 associated disease. We need another level of investigation. Depending on your diagnostic options, there is in situ hybridization for PCV3. I believe they also do RNA-scope. I'm not a diagnostician, but I believe that is a follow-up test. So there are add-on tests that we can do. Like we think of PCV2, right? We go to IHC. It is not the same test, but in the same way, we can evaluate, is the pathogen in the site of infection? Very, very rare in my practice history that I have had to do anything about PCV3. Rare that I've investigated it, because those reproductive cases that aren't obviously PRRS or something else are rare. But even of the rare cases I've investigated, I can only think of 1 or 2 cases where I've taken any action relative to PCV3 in my entire career. And PCV3 has been around for decades. It is not a new virus. So my personal opinion, if it was going to explode like PCV2 did in 2006, 2007, we're already past when that would have happened. We've been talking about this for 5 to 6, 7 years now, and it hasn't really changed. So I think it's relatively safe to say that we should be aware of it. We don't need to take action on every flow, and in fact, I would say quite the opposite. Very minority of the cases do we need to actually do anything about it.
Following that, I just wanted to add the comment that during my break session in this afternoon for the PCV2 Mythbusters, that's one thing that I did not emphasize, which I really should have, but maybe I couldn't have done that because of time limitation anyway, is that the importance of the pathological examination. So I really would encourage you, if you want to go and dig deeper, then do the necropsy and take the samples and send them to the lab. And Clayton just mentioned about the IHC, which is immunohistochemistry. So do more pathological examination, not only doing the serology or microbiology testing, but pathology is very important key for the PCV2 for sure.
While waiting for some questions,
I have a question. So
Okay.
at least I received a question.
Go
So
ahead,
it's
Lina.
for Professor Otake. PVC3 is prevalent all over the world now. How to measure the impact of PV3 to production? And is there any recommendation for PCV3 control?
So I understand the question is what's the impact of PCV3? Yeah, that's what we have been discussing.
Yeah.
So I think we need further investigation. Yeah, so we do not even get to the point that we have a final conclusion that PCV3 is actually, maybe it's significant, but as Daniel mentioned, we can find them everywhere. And probably from healthy pigs too, and sometimes you can find pigs that have clinical signs combined with the PRRS. So we really do not know that for sure. That's my opinion, but if you want to add, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe Iowa State, Pablo Pinedo is funded to do some studies to determine case definition. So the first step to know how real or how frequent a disease is to have a shared agreement that this diagnosis represents PCV3 disease. It took a while with PCV2, eventually we got there, but until then, it's really speculation. There's a lot of reports, but often they don't have the full criteria. And I think until then, it's speculation, the numbers and the prevalence.
Yeah, it has been clear that it does have the potential to cause disease, but like Clayton said,
It's rare.
It's rare.
There's 1 billion pigs produced in the world every year. Billion with a B. All of them get infected with PCV3 most likely. Very few show any clinical signs, and almost none of the growing pigs are vaccinated. So I think you can learn a lot from that combination of statements. We have problems in the pig industry. PCV3 deserves attention. It's much lower on the list than a lot of the other pathogens we've talked about today.
Okay.
I have a question for Dr. Clayton. About I have a ring case in my country, this farm is now really endemic with many pathogens, for example, PRRS and SIV and some other pathogens. And this farm doesn't have an ideal soil herd structure between the parity. For example, this farm have high rate of P1 and P0, P1 and old sow. And now this farm may have some problem with abortion and stillborn increasing. And so with this case, what I should do to stabilize this situation? What action should I do?
I don't know that there's going to be one thing you can do to make that entire situation better. I think having the disease problems, they need to be addressed one by one. And I would try to pick the disease problem you feel most confident in being able to improve first. Take on the easiest enemy first. Like I mentioned, multiple pathogens together is 1 + 1 = 4. Do that math the other direction. Take one away and see if you can get 4 back to 1 in that way. If that is influenza, great, go tackle influenza, even though we didn't talk about it today. If that's mycoplasma, fantastic. The parity profile problem is a separate one, obviously. Your biggest problem is really the fact that you're going to have to keep breeding a lot of those older parity sows. So you're not going to be able to cull just because they are a high parity. You're going to have to continue to breed the parity 6s, the parity 7s, the parity 8s, the parity 9s. Make sure your gilt supply is consistent, and make sure your gilt breeding target is consistent every week if you are a continuous production farm. A lot of people don't think of it that way. They think of their gilt replacement rate over the course of a year, but consistency and lack of variation is everything. And if you breed 100 gilts in a month, but all of those gilts are bred into one breed group, well, that doesn't fix your overall parity profile. Each individual week is its own breed group. And so a good rule of thumb I use is 1% of your mated inventory should be bred in gilts every week. What I mean by that is if you are a 1,000 sow farm, breeder herd, you should bring 10 gilts a week, 1% of 1,000. If you are a 6,000 sow level farm, 60 gilts every week, and strive very hard to hit that weekly gilt number. And it's going to take a couple of years to fix the parity problem, but short of a depop repop, there's not really a faster way to fix that.
Lena, you have another one?
So we have two questions from Chinese guests in the back, which I would like to translate for our speakers.
I will repeat the two questions. The first question I think is actually for Dr. Clayton. So this question is as follows. Because as far as we know, for each of the barn, for each types of the different pathogen, we might need to use the specific material, for example, the stillbirths, the mummies, or the diarrhea, the feces, in order to acclimatize the salts and the guilt based on their pathogen. So how do you think we should acclimatize those guilts? And can you share with us some experiences? And what is the right timing to actually do the acclimatization? And the second question is actually for all the panelists. So the second question is as follows. For PCV2 and mycoplasma, there are two completely different kinds of pathogen, and the immunity should be established at different timing points. But now we have the commercial available vaccination, the Flex combo. So if we give the pigs vaccination in a combo, can we reach the immunity prevention effects at the same time? So two questions. Thank you.
I'll start with the mummies and stillborns and piglet diarrhea. In some situations, those tissues can be helpful for gilt acclimation. If we have very active PRRS, if we have any concerns about ASF, If we have active CSF or pseudorabies, I would not recommend using those tissues or the scours from the piglets as part of the gilt acclimation program. I think we will do more damage than we will good if we are not careful. So for lack of a better term, in a healthy reproductive herd, healthy meaning that we don't have any of those very serious diseases present, the tissues from the mummies, the stillborns, and then the piglet diarrhea can be a nice addition to the gilt acclimation. If I use those, I typically give that tissue feedback at the same time I'm giving the pre-breeding vaccines. So 20 weeks of age, we select the gilts, we start the parvo, lepto, erysipelas vaccines, and we also do that feedback event at that age. If I'm going to do it, I typically take a very high quality blender and I blend those tissues up as best I can, and then I place them into a plastic container and freeze them. And then that frozen large kind of pocky puck, put that into the pen with the gilts at the 20 weeks of age, and they kind of lick it, they smell it, they push it around the pen, they play with it, and they get the exposure done in that way. It's hard to do feedback in a GDU that is fully slatted if you don't do that approach. But again, caveat, be very careful about your disease status. For some diseases, PRRS, pseudorabies, CSF, any concerns with ASF, I would not recommend to do that. I'll let the group comment on the...
The second question, if I understood it correctly, is on combination vaccines and whether programming... okay. So whether... No. I'll just be the moderator today. Whether programming of it would be ideal, knowing that I think he's thinking of probably delaying mycoplasma vaccination against an early PCV2 vaccination. Any comments on that?
I'll give a stab. I mean, I think one beauty about our portfolio is that actually you can choose, right? You have the ability to combine them very easily with Twistback if you want to use them together, or you can use them separately. So there's no obligation if you feel that a different timing would work better. Like so many things, the answer is probably it depends. I think in the majority of farms, vaccination around weaning for both those pathogens is probably absolutely fine. And that, when I look globally, I would say that's by far the most common timing. If you vaccinate later in the nursery for any disease, typically we have more PRRS activity. Maternal immunity against some of those viruses is declining, so you maybe have a less healthy pig. It's also more stress for the pigs compared to vaccinating in the farrowing house. So all of these things you need to weigh on your farm with your disease profile. It's simple to say vaccinate around weaning, but then I think you need to look and see if that's the best for your farm. In general, I think a lot of these issues come up because we have maybe not enough information around the impact of maternally derived immunity or maternally derived antibodies. And there's a lot of confusion in publications and out there around this. A lot of it hinges around focusing on seroconversion. One of the myths that Satoshi Otake covered, you do see definitely an impact on reduced seroconversion if you vaccinate in the presence of high MDA. But in most cases, certainly with mycoplasma and PCV2, that has no bearing on protective immunity. So I think there's been a lot of confusion that is making it harder than it should be. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment. I mean, Reed, you've dealt with these questions before, sometimes the three-way combination, right, with PRRS. I think every farm is a little bit different, but in general, that combination has been highly successful around the world. So we're very confident with it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I could add anything to that, but other than not every farm is, a pea in a pod. I mean, and that's the beauty of some of the combination vaccines. You can customize them to best suit the needs of your farm and expectations. So you have that tool, and it's pretty convenient.
The last thing, the last thing I'll mention, we deal with this question a lot, as you can tell, is around early vaccination. So I see, particularly in Asia, a lot of interest in vaccinating pigs very early. And there's probably some logic in the sense that the pigs break early in the nursery maybe, and you feel you need to get ahead of the infection. But if you take something home from today, is remember that the source of that virus is back to the future. It's up the line. If your pigs are breaking with PRRS or mycoplasma in the nursery, there's probably very likely a lot of vertical transmission. There's a lot of virus coming from that sow to those piglets.
Yeah, I was going to make a comment earlier. Daniel's answer to the gentleman's question earlier about, does it make sense or could it be a protocol to vaccinate pigs early, in the presence of evidence of in utero exposure, pigs being born virus positive. There are some transitional, I call them, transitional vaccination protocols where some people, especially when that level of virus in the farrowing room in neonatal pigs prior to weaning, if the prevalence is low, there's some intrinsic benefit to vaccinating early. But I look at that as a transitional protocol because that was the beauty of the program today. The root cause, the problem, is back to the future, okay? There's circulation of virus in gilts and in the breeding herd. Pregnant females are getting exposed and they're farrowing positive pigs that are infected in utero. You need to correct that. You need to correct that. Farrow negative pigs, wean negative pigs. Now you have a very good window of opportunity to vaccinate that pig should it get exposed later on in life through the nursery finisher.
And I guess the reason you're saying that is because we don't want to vaccinate sick pigs, right? If they're down, if they're feverish, if they're in the nursery, don't mess with those. So go before and vaccinate them early in that transitional period until the population is recovered, and then you shift that forward to when they are
Exactly,
weaned, right?
and I probably didn't explain that very well, but and actually you and your team have done some work to demonstrate some benefit in that. But yeah, there's an opportunity to protect those pigs when the prevalence of the virus is low within that population, generate protective immunity within that group or within that group, that population of pigs. It's not ideal timing, but there's value there. But I look at it as a transitional type protocol until you get, the gilt and the breeding herd situation corrected, or weaning negative pigs.
Yeah, I just wanted to add some comments on that. Is that every time we are discussing about timing of the vaccination or whatever, then I think, as a practical point of view, it's also important to take a consideration in timing of the infection, but also, the timing of the vaccination has to be labor friendly. It has to be practically feasible. You don't want to vaccinate pigs any time after weaning, then you are going to have to go into the pen, and then you have to make a lot of stress on the pigs. So, you have to think about the immunology and duration of the immunity or protection, but also you have to think about your people, if that is, make them doable. Otherwise, like Clayton mentioned, people make a mistake, and all people have a bad day. So, program has to be practically feasible too. It has to be effective in terms of the immunology, but also it has to be practical for labor aspect as well.
If I could add something to all of this, you've all been talking about managing the herd's health starting in gilt development. And Clayton, you mentioned, it might be a good idea to expand your GDU, if it's too small, too constrictive. And as you said that, the first thing I thought of is there might be a little hesitancy out there with that. Yeah, because, markets are bad. I could hear the objections almost psychically. And so what I would say to that, if that's your objection, is you're paying for something, whether it's going to be you're paying for a GDU expansion or you're paying for disease. You're paying for something, so maybe it is time to take that hard look at, is it worth digging a little deeper to expand our GDU so that we can manage this problem earlier and start to reap some of those economic benefits long term.
Well, and specifically for your GDU, you're paying for the space when you buy the gilts.
Yeah.
If you're buying the gilts at 24 weeks of age, you are paying for the space it took to raise those gilts, the feed it took to raise those gilts, all of that. You're paying for it already. I get there's a capital cost to investing in that on your end up front, but over time, the costs will be better from you owning your GDU space because someone is taking margin off that if you're buying the gilt. It's baked into the cost.
Well, I guess that's all she wrote, gentlemen, in terms of time. Thank you very much for your participation in the question and answer. And I especially liked when we made a call for those who are not English proficient to use our translators. So thank you very much for that. So let's give a round of applause for our speakers today. Gentlemen.